Right, cool. So it's ready. All right. Welcome to this session about actions. So what we're going to talk about is repository actions and document library actions. And my name is Martin Bergljung. I work for Ixus in London. I'm from Sweden and been working with Alfresco for 5-6 years now. I've written a book also called Alfresco 3 Business Solutions. I'm just signed a contract to write Alfresco CMIS also, another book. So I need to get on top of that. I also do quite a lot of blogging, and so I have a blog, ecmstuff.blogspot.com, and this presentation is based on some of the blogging there. So I have one blog there about Doc Lib Actions for 3.4, version 3.4, and one that is relevant to this presentation for 4. So how many of you has done implementation of repository actions? And how many has done document library actions implementation? So, right, so that's good. So I was a bit afraid that everybody would. This is kind of a little bit going back to basics, and I'm going to try and stick to developer-centric because it's a developer conference. So first, what's an action, and then we're going to look at implementing a repo action and some extra stuff around that, and then dig into document library actions. So, right, so what's an action? You can say it's a unit of work that you kind of encapsulate, and then you can reuse that. And you can reuse it from many different parts of the system, so you can use it from rules, workflows, web scripts, and so on. And it also hides complexities for end users. So that's basically high-level view of an action. So that's kind of abstract. So what is it really? So an action actually, it does something to a node in the repository. So it will process a document node or a folder node. And it can optionally get some input from the user and use that in the processing of the content. So you got actions all over the UI. So you even see it says actions. So document actions, folder actions, and pop-up menus with actions. So everything you actually see in Alfresco is basically, in the core, it's an action. It's either a repo action and on top of it a Doc Lib action, or just a Doc Lib action. Right. So if you look at an action, more abstract, it's just an action, and then if you dig into it, you will have a backend part, which you usually refer to as a repository action. And that's something that goes into Alfresco WAR. So there's 2 web applications in Alfresco. Alfresco WAR contains the actual repository. And then there's a Share WAR, which is the Alfresco Share UI, which talks to Alfresco repository. And that's where you plug in your document library actions. Now, you can implement an action in quite a lot of different ways. So if we are looking at the Alfresco Share side here, and document library actions, there are a few ways you can implement this. And so you can have a JavaScript action executor that calls an Alfresco repository action. We're going to see an example of that. And there's some helpers and things around that to make that happen. You can call a web script directly from Doc Lib Action. I'll show you how to do that. And you can just call a regular web page on the internet, for example, Google. You can also call a page inside Share. So that's basically 3 different ways of implementing a document library action. A document lib action can use a form to collect some data from the user. It can also use evaluators to see if it should be displayed and so on. So that's kind of what we're going to dig into a little bit now. So what do you need to do if you want to implement an action? So you need to do, and some of these are optional. You don't need to do everything. But in the back end, you usually implement a repository action there. And then on the front end is where the document library action is implemented. So some of these might be optional depending on your use case. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how you can implement an action called send as email. And that's going to display a form. And when I click OK, it's going to send an email. And that's going to use both on the share side, the document lib action, and on the Alfresco War repo side, it's going to use the repository action that to actually send the email. This can be done in a lot of different ways. This is just one way to this kind of gives examples of how you can use these different types of actions. So let's start with the repository action. And these guys, they implement an action executor abstract base. That's what you need to implement to hook up to the repo action framework. And you want to tell it what kind of user interface data that it's going to need. And that's going to be used in a method called add parameter definition. So here, you're kind of setting up what kind of user data information that you're going to use in your repository action. In this case, we'll just use 3 text fields to collect some information to be able to send an email to somebody. And they are all mandatory, and we're going to pick up the labels for them from a properties file. Now, the main method for a repo action is the execute imp. You get information about the action sent in, and then usually you want to check if the node is there. You can be in a scenario. You might ask, why do you need to check that? Obviously, it's there. It's not obvious all the time. So you can have things going on at the same time that might delete the node or something. So you always want to make sure it's there. It prevents a lot of nasty error scenarios. So here, you're going to get these parameters, and then you're going to send an email via Java mail. You might say, isn't there a repo action to send an email? There is. But I'm not sure that one can be used to add an attachment with the actual document. So I'm just going to use Java mail. I'm not going to go into that here, because that's not the kind of the thing we are talking about. At the end, I'm going to set an aspect so I can see if it's already been sent, the document. And then I can use an evaluator later on to see if that's set. And then I can display the action if I want to or not. Right, so I got the code for the repo action. Now I need to register it. So I need to make it known to Alfresco. Tell it, here's another action, so it knows how to deal with that, and then it will display it in the UI automatically, and that's done by extending the action executor abstract bean. It has an init method that will kind of take this repo action and then add it to a list of all actions available in Alfresco. I use a node service and a helper to get the content of the document and so on. Now, so we got an action. How can we test it before we move on? You want to be able to see if it works. So you can actually go in and create the rule. And then if everything is working out, you should actually see your new action here. The ID is what you're going to see. So here is the identifier that identifies this action from now on. And for the future things I'm going to do. So it's important to remember that. You can see it's going to pop up fields there automatically for you. So you're going to get kind of a base UI already without doing anything. You don't have to define a form or anything. It's just going to pop up there automatically. So the thing is, I need to know which field comes where. It's going to come after the way I defined them in the class and so on. And I can just fill them in. And then in this case, I'm just going to drop a document into a folder and then activate this rule. And then I can see if it works, and it's going to send an email and so on. If you're not happy with that, you can also use a JavaScript console to test your new repo action. So you can use the actions root object and then create your repo action with the ID there. And that's a very good way of doing that quickly. So this is the JavaScript console add-ons that you can download from the add-ons alfresco.com. So these fields that popped up here in the when you selected that repo action in the rules form, they are displayed there because of some default functionality in Alfresco. So it will look at the data type of the field and so on, if it's a constraint or whatever, and then display whatever it can to help you out. So there's a lot of stuff around displaying data that happens automatically. Right, so we got our Doc Lib action. Let's now hook it up to we got our repo action. Let's hook it up to a document library action. And these go into the share war. So we're going to have a share config custom file somewhere in our extension project. And in this file, there's a new section, Doc Lib Actions, kind of a main section there. That's where you would put your configuration for your Doc Lib Actions in a subsection called Actions. There are 3 types of actions that I already mentioned in the initial overview picture of how you can implement Doc Lib Actions. There are JavaScript actions, which obviously executes a JavaScript function. And there are page links, that's going to be a relative URL into a share page. Or there are just web links going anywhere. Right, so if you have kind of digged into actions before, Doc Lib Actions before, you probably remembered you have to override web scripts and mess around. So in 3.4, to define an action, a Doc Lib action there, this wasn't available. So it's been massively improved how you can define new Doc Lib actions. So it's much better in 4. If you look at my blogs, you will see the difference. I pointed out everywhere. Now, so how does this definition look like? So you're going to have the Doc Lib Actions main section, and then under the subsection Actions, you're going to have an action definition. Like a repo action, it has an identifier. We're going to use that identifier again, so it's important. Type, it specifies JavaScript link or page link. In this case, I've taken an action that is in share. So if you're interested in actions that exist and want to see how they do things, you can look at share -document library -config.xml. It will be in your exploded share web application. So web apps, share, webinf, classes, Alfresco, that's where you're going to find it. Right. So what do we more have? We have a label. So when you actually see it in menus in share, you want to have some nice label for the action. You're going to tell Alfresco what permission is needed to actually run this action. Because you are changing the type of a folder or document, you need to be able to write to it. And then here is an evaluator. An evaluator will see and look at the content item you are trying to change the type for in this case and see if it is locked, then you can't do anything to it. So it won't display that action. And right, so if you have a JavaScript action, there is a special parameter. You can pass in lots of parameters, but this is a special parameter called function. It's going to point to what JavaScript function you want to call from this document library action. In this case, it points to one of the out-of-the-box Doc Lib Actions. Right. Now, how does these other types of actions definition looks like? Okay, a link can be like this, so it's quite simple. Just put the type as link, and then there's an href parameter where you put the URL. In this case, it's going to pick up the URL from the, if you look in actions.js, if you look up that file, which has all the JavaScript actions defined, there's a lot of variables there that are defined and available. One of them is download URL. If you look at the how a page link action, which actually, if you activate it, it will call a share page. So here is a relative path. So in this case, I want to see the document details. So these are actions that you actually see in the share UI. Now, you got an action. So we got a repo action, and we got a start of Doc Lib Action. We need to kind of position it in the menus. So how do you do that? You use action groups. So that's another subsection to Doc Lib Actions. Here, in this section, you're going to tell the system where this action should be visible. The 4 top 1 action groups here are kind of relevant to us. Document browse means document details. Means if you are looking at the detail page of a document, then you want the action to be popping up there. That's controlled by that action group. Folder details, the same thing, folder actions. And the browse is then obviously when you browse a folder. If you want it to pop up when you're hovering over a folder, then use the folder browse group and add your action there. And this looks like this. For example, from Alfresco's source code. So you're going to see action group ID. In this case, going back to the document change type, we want it to show up when I look at the folder details of a folder and when I look at the document details. And there is an index. That's important to know what that is, because that kind of says where in the menus or where in the details page this action should be displayed. So if you look at the highest number there and put your action at a even higher number, then it's going to be last in the list of actions. Right. So you might think, okay, is there any way that we can call a repo action without having to code too much JavaScript on the Doc Lib action side? And there is some help JavaScript functions that we can use, actually. So we're going to use this one here, on action form dialog. So that means we want to display a form and then call a repo action with whatever data we collected. So that's useful. If we just want to call the repo action immediately without collecting some user information, we can use this JavaScript function. So in a lot of cases, you don't actually have to code any JavaScript. And this is how that looks like, a usage of that. If you know there is a document execute script action, this is also from Alfresco source. So here, they are also using on action form dialog. So they say, there's going to be a dialog, I'm going to collect some script. And then I'm going to give it some information about the form development kit stuff, the form, how you actually call and create the form via this URL here. So you can see it takes item card, ID, and mode. So this tells the system that this has to do with an action, and the Spring ID for that action is script, and the form should be created in like empty create mode. And then this destination parameter is needed if you can't run without it. It's where content will be put if this action creates new content. And then you can use messages for success or failure scenarios. Now, so this tells the system to call this URL, and this URL will actually display a form based on this evaluator here for script, links to the script action ID. And there is a form to actually pick up, there's going to be a combo box where you just pick up the script from the data dictionary. Data dictionary scripts. So that's kind of important to understand that, because it gives you lots of freebies if you know that stuff. Now, what do we need to do to implement our send as email action? We're also going to use the on action form dialog here. So it's an action again. It's called send as email in our Spring configuration. We're going to get the dialog empty when we start up. We're going to have a new evaluator. It's going to use the CM email aspect that we applied in the repo action. And we're not going to display this action if it already has been sent. There is a new attribute here, icon. That's going to point to what icon we want to use for the action in the Share UI. We're going to look more at that in a bit. All right, so we are saying here also that our send as email, put it last in the browse, when you're browsing and you see a document. If the pop-up menu there, put this action label last. And also in the document details page, it should be at the last action there. Now, if we run this now, we're going to see something like this. So you can always test before you move on. So you see here it's missing labels in a property file. But it does figure out how to actually bump up a form, even if we haven't defined much around it. We actually haven't defined the form configuration yet. You see the stars there for mandatory. It picks that up from the parameter configuration. Right, so if we add some properties files and add labels and things, and we're going to at the same time add form field labels also, get things going. If we add this custom properties to Slingshot application context, Slingshot is just the old name for Share, if you didn't know. Right. And if we also, at the same time, add a form, so this is how you do that in Share Config Custom. Again, send as email, the Spring ID for our repo action. And we say that, okay, this form, we should have these fields visible, and they come from the repo action here. And how should they appear? So we are just going to use the default control, the free market template for the first two, which is like just a text field. Then we are saying for the body text, we actually want to use a text area, so we are overriding that. Now it's starting to look a bit better, actually. So now I have send as email, I have labels, everything, so it's looking good. Now, icons. I want an icon also because it was missing. That's a bit tricky. You have to put them in a special place, and they have to actually be named according to the icon attribute -16.png. It has to be named like that, and it has to go into Document Library Actions. So you would put that under meta-inf somewhere in your Share extension, like this, for example. Now, if you try it again, now you'll see the email kind of icon there. So now it's starting to look better. But it would be good if it did not show up if you already used it on a document and sent it. And it would be good if we had an indication when we looked at this document to see that it has been emailed. So let's start with the evaluators. So we can, they are defined as Spring beans. So we need to actually define a Spring bean with this ID. If we were looking in the logs now, we would have an exception that it can't find this evaluator. Now, evaluators, they are implemented in Java, and you basically extend the base evaluator in the Spring, in the Share world. So it's something that goes into the Share jar extension. So in your IDE, when you want to find this class, you actually need to bring in the Share war thingy. Now, here, this is an example. You're probably thinking, do you really need to do this? Isn't there some kind of already defined evaluator that you can use for aspects? There is, but I just want to talk about how you actually implement an evaluator. So this is how you do that. And then you get a JSON object here which contains lots of properties and stuff. And for example, you can get the node aspects out of it. If you debug this, you will see all the stuff that's contained in here. And then you can use that to find this aspect, see if it's there. You can see I kind of did a constant on CM email because I cannot use content model because I'm not on the Alfresco war side. Now, you need to define this evaluator in Spring as usual. And then you should be able to go on. Right. I mentioned that might already be evaluators available, and there are. So I was kind of overworking it a little bit. You can use evaluators that are out of the box, like has aspect, is MIME type, etc. So what I could have done was to just extend this has aspect and just use the same Spring ID and then provide the aspect, and that would be it. So it's a good idea to look those up before starting implementation. Now, I also mentioned that if you're in the browse view and you see a document, it'd be good if there was an indicator there, so I could see that it's already been emailed. Those guys, they go into the indicator subsection of the document library, and they're defined as with the indicator element. ID as usual, and label, index here also. So there might be several indicators for each document item, so you need to kind of tell the system where do you want your indicator to show up. An icon here is it's not consistent how they define these attributes. Here they want you to actually define it -16 PNG, but when you define an action, they just want you to type in email instead. So it's not consistent there, but as long as you know that it works. Label, we need to put that into the properties file also. So what this gives us is, if this document here has been emailed, it will show up as an indicator there, and the label will be if you hover over it, which is cool. I will also see that the CM email stuff will show up if I go into the details page. Now, so we looked at just calling a repo action. So you probably wanted to know, okay, how do I actually implement the new JavaScript action? That's why I came to the talk, maybe. Let's look at that then. Right, so let's do a new action. It's going to be a simple one. It's just going to show a custom message, you know, those gray messages that pop up. So it's a JavaScript action. Function we're going to call is onShowCustomMessage. So how do we define this new JavaScript action? We create a new JavaScript file, call it something, And inside this file, we're going to use a new kind of technique to register new action JavaScript implementation. So you fire this event, register action. There is some listener in the system that's going to kind of respond and take care of registering a new action with the name on show custom message. So that matches what we defined, obviously, in the action definition. And then I just define my function that should be called. And in this case, I'm just going to display a message. And I'm going to pick the message from a property file. And then I'm going to also feed that message. It has substitution variables too for a file name and username. How do I get this new JavaScript file loaded? So previously, you had to override web scripts, and then in the .head.webscript, you had to load them there. Now it's much easier. There is a section you can use in share config custom, Doc Lib custom. In there, you're just going to put all your dependencies, and when Alfresco creates the page, it's automatically going to put a script loading thing in the head section of that page for you. So this is what I need to do. I put my JavaScript file in the document library folder there, and it has to kind of, it's a relative path to under meta-inf in the share extension. Right, so if I run this now, I can just click and it pops up the message, and that's it. So that's the simplest kind of JavaScript action you can do probably. It doesn't actually do anything more than show that message. But it kind of shows the principle of how you implement that. Now, what if you wanted to call a web script? This is how you can do that. That's actually what I did in my blog. So there, I didn't use a repo action on the server side. I just created a web script to send the email, and then I call it like this. So it's like an AJAX call, basically. So here, the action is called on action send email. So there is this actions, generic action function that you can use out of the box. So you basically feed it with the success message you want. Basically, that's going to be displayed if the email is sent successfully and everything is fine. And you can also have a failure message, and these both go into the properties file. What you do then is you specify the web script that you want to call. In this case, you can see that I left out the /service and so on. You don't include that. Because what you want to do is you want to proxy this via share, so you get the authentication and everything correctly. So by using that Alfresco constants proxy underscore URI, you're using a special /share/proxies and then /my company, blah, blah, blah. So authentication will happen automatically for you when you use this. I pass on the node ref and username, so they will be basically parameters on the web script call. So that's kind of neat. So now you should be quite on top of how to do repo action and Doc Lib Actions. And that's it. Any questions? I think he's going to get the microphone.
You demonstrated how to define this permission check for Doc Lib Action in the share config custom. What we often need is to check membership of the user to special group, etc. And currently it's only possible if we implement Java Evaluator and call REST action on the repository via HTTP client or another framework. Would it be possible to improve it a little bit so we have membership evaluator or maybe a wrapper of authority service on the share side?
There is, So the permission stuff, it is a JavaScript function that handles that. So you could probably kind of override that in your JavaScript code or something. I don't actually know because I haven't done it.
Oh. Yeah, it works, but it's difficult. So we need to.
Yeah, I don't have a
patch some files to get this working, but it's very common ECM use case to check the membership in some special group to display or hide and Doc Lib Action.
Oh, okay. So you want to display or hide it based on a particular membership in a group or something.
Right, right.
So I think now there is, isn't there, oh, I would have to look up if there is an evaluator out of the box.
No,
isn't there now?
I didn't find anything. So if
okay, maybe it's coming.
It would be great to improve.
Add a Jira about it.
Yeah, I posted it to the
No, but it's a good use case.
Okay.
It should definitely be a Jira about that.
Yeah. So an evaluator such as I don't know,
is in group or something.
Like that. Yeah,
is in group. It's just
great.
taking the group underscore name of the group.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you.
So, excuse me. I think all the sections are in fact defined in shareconfig custom XML.
Yeah.
It's a pity because it can grow to a big and unreadable.
Yeah, what you can do is, let's talk about that. So, okay, so that's a good question. So he is asking, okay, if you just keep adding stuff to your share config custom, it's going to be humongous and unusable. So in the latest kind of share extension, how you build share extensions, you can define a share config custom per share extension jar. And you have to put it not under web extension. You have to put it under meta-inf. Otherwise, it will be overwritten by the next share extension. So now you can have 10 share extensions, and if you put share config custom under meta-inf in each one, they will just be merged. So in that way, I think you can kind of modularize your extensions to smaller share extensions and then use a share config custom in each one.
Is there example code available?
Yeah, so I have, for example, on my blog, ecmstuff.blogspot.com, if you look up the basically Doc Lib Actions for Alfresco 4, you can download code. I will put up code from this, behind this presentation, the code to actually do this on my blog together with the presentation.
Hi. What about status or progress of repo action? If your action is long and you call it from Doc Lib Action, what happens on the UI?
That's a good question. So if you saw the kind of bare bones form, it had a little checkbox with something like asynchronous. So I think you can actually say that do the repo action asynchronously and then just get back to the UI immediately. That's a good question. There is another question.
And I already told it to Dave Trepper and Ray Gauss, but we need the same technique in the search result page in Alfresco. We also want to define actions and evaluators, etc., for results of the search.
Yeah,
because
and for the
toolbar
and other places.
Yeah.
Lots of people want to extend the toolbar, which is not.
Yeah, toolbar is exactly the same.
Yes, but I think they're working on they're probably taking step by step to see what the response is and so on. So.
Yeah, but I think for common use cases, the actions on the search page, search result page. So if you see documents that you found after simple or advanced search, has more priority as this toolbar stuff from my point of view, because search is used to get.
So you want basically to add actions when. So you did a search.
Yes.
And then you want to have your own action there. And maybe you also want a different like spreadsheet view and stuff. So
everything that I have in the
that you can do in
document library
in search.
would love to have in the search result page, because if you have billions of documents, the only way you can find them is search.
Have you configured? Have you kind of added some Jira or something for that?
Yeah, I already did it.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to mention it's important.
Yeah. Good. So everybody go into Jira.
Everybody should know that it's important for us.
Yeah.
Almost every customer is asking for that.
We also do a lot of customizations to share, like the previous talk about the facets, but also other, like you want to search, you define a new core in Solar and you want to search some other wiki or something. You need to kind of customize the share result thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your comments. All right, thanks.